giving this just a few moments because it tends to skip in the beginning for some reason. And I'm more than well aware I'm playing shilly music in the background, but okay, that should be long enough. All right. Chapter 1, Fear. He was a well-to-do fellow, I tell you, though there was certainly nothing well-to-do about the current and rather unnerving situation he was in. He stood tall and proper on the street curb, you see, waiting outside in the falling violet rain. A car passing by, kicking up a wave of water at him as it did, drenching him entirely. His name was Onyx J. Brooks, by the way, and it was the best day of his life. Because on that particular day, he anticipated winning the city's sole major, an award he had worked his entire life to get, and the last award he needed before finally being deemed successful, consequently freeing everyone from the monstrous mountainous confines of Fable Valley. For they were all playing a game, a rather dangerous one. And the game went like this: win all the city's general awards, as well as its sole major, and if you do, you shall be deemed worthy, successful, setting everyone free. Onyx stood poised for victory as he lifted his chin, his glowing grape eyes like ominous purple lanterns against a late day gray and watery violet hue. One of his eyes glowing painstakingly brighter than the other, something like two missized buttons on a teddy bear, a physical attribute he was more than well aware of, thank you. Now then, he was human, mind you, for he had a breath and a drumming heartbeat, just like you and I. Of course, I'm certainly not fooling anyone here, for you know just as well as I that Onyx Brooks was different. He was success, you see, and that's all there is to it, he reminded himself, reaching for his neck, and tugging at the black, cord-like choke collar belted firmly around his throat. His keep collar, in other words, something he, along with everyone else in Fable Valley, had been required to wear, or else. Tugging at his collar again and again, perturbed over a most unusual and ghastly rumbling he experienced earlier that morning down in his quarters. Though ostensibly no one else had felt such a rumbling, he thought to himself. He wondered what could have caused such a tremor, and why. He swept his face side to side, ridding himself from such negative think. He gazed onward, down the narrow and dark stretch of Harpoon Alley, which just so happened to be the only alley in all the city. Stretching from the city's south into its north, the alley had been different than the rest of the city, and in a rather apparent way, as you shall soon see. But then, without warning, a blistering white flash like an atomic bomb detonated across the street from him. "Ma!" he exclaimed, shielding his face. Fluttering his eyes, he drew his pale face back to the light. A towering black mirror skyscraper stood before him, and roughly halfway up it, there was a giant white movie screen. On the hard one that had words sliding across it, almost like an advertisement. In big, bold black letters, the screen said, "Freedom for one means freedom for all, but dare one cheat, and I'll strangle you all." He frowned, tugging his collar, certainly not wanting to be strangled by it. He also found it unfair that the almighty keepers could use the forbidden F word when yet he couldn't, though such a word was a trifling matter to him by that point, because quite frankly he'd rather have the real thing, more than anything, actually. He thought this to himself, just as roaring engines came bouldering down the road from his left. He jerked that direction, and just at that moment a bolted black armored truck came punching out the grade down the street, followed by another truck, and another, and another. All four trucks roaring towards him, none of them slowing a bit. His polished black dress shoes clicked on the black glass surface as he wittingly took 4 lunging steps back. Cresting water splashed to the sidewalk before him like waves to a flat beach. He smirked, peering at the trucks as they passed. Each truck had the word Keeper's House in bloody red letters rainbowing across its side, along with the words "Damn it, Fable Valley" under that. He scoffed, striding back up to the curb, watching the roaring trucks speed away, indeed pleased to have seen them in the first place. For those trucks carried food and supplies, goods that had been exported and outsourced from the city of Dambit. He was always astonished that Dambit gave up such materials for free. It was not so much as a single prish spent. It's no wonder Lord Orin keeps getting elected over and over again, thought Onyx to himself. He thought so deep and the trucks roared so loud that he didn't even notice the box-shaped pickup truck driven by his longtime friend, Bruce Bonesteel, speeding towards him. That is until the truck came to a screeching halt at the curb. He swung to the truck, watching as a wave of sparkling clear water rolled over him. Drats. Splash. And his fitted black and purple pinstripe suit, far darker in color now, even more so than before, and it hung heavy over his shoulders. "Howdy, pard!" cried Bruce Bonesteel in a hearty but fruity voice from the driver's seat. Onyx sighed and began striding to the truck. "Bruce, good to see you," he said flatly. Bruce smirked merrily, with peachy and bulbous round cheeks smushing Bruce's thin lips, as well as juice from out the wad of tobacco Bruce was enjoying. Onyx hopped in the truck, slamming the door closed. "How's life been treating you, Brooksy?" said Bruce. Onyx groaned. "Like it caught me in bed with its sister," he said. Bruce squinting at him. "So, how you been, Bruce?" "Oh, I reckon I've been happier than a pig in mud. Did you hear the big news?" He replied, confident that Bruce must have been referring to Onyx's recent and unprecedented and historical accomplishment of winning the city's second to last award. Bonnie got recruited to join the MM, Bruce continued. Onyx's chest deflated. The MM, he said. I say, miners are for code enforcement. Yeah, so, replied Bruce. Well, isn't Bonnie still an engineer, like Dr. Carl? I reckon. Then what does the MM want with her? Bruce shrugged, conveying to Onyx that Bruce hadn't the slightest idea, and that Bonnie didn't fancy Bruce asking too many questions. Interesting, I see, mumbled Onyx, stroking his chin. Danny Husky, said Bruce, slapping the steering wheel. Onyx flinched. Been a while, huh, Pard? Onyx fluttered his eyes. 6 months, actually, he answered. Bruce began rubbing the back of his own neck. Dadgum, been that long? Onyx nodded. Well, shoot, guess I've been so dadgum busy with Bonnie's whole transition that I plumb forgot how much time's been passing. It's all right, Bruce, I assure you, I was simply tugging your collar. But we need to hurry up now, or... I'm sorry, Brooksy. Honest I am. Do you forgive me? Bruce beseeched. Onyx sighed. There's nothing to forgive, Bruce. Now, look. He rolled his wrist up at Bruce, gently shoving his sleek silver watch in the direction of Bruce's round and shaven face. Bruce's eyes widened. Dadgum, Pard, why didn't you say something? Onyx's head tilted as Bruce threw the truck into gear. Yee-haw! Cried Bruce, punching the gas. Went the truck, whipping around in the street, spinning the opposite way, and they were off with a vroom. Immediately jerking right, they drove north at Metro Main, speeding deeper and deeper into the Black Mirror City. A once gloomy orange sky now cast blue ink and night. Stars glittered above, streaking like comets across Black Mirror buildings as they sped faster. Skyscrapers flanked on either side of them, and shooting high up into the night. Each skyscraper framed around its edges and tops by brilliant beaming cords of neon yellows, blues, purples, and pinks, casting both the rain and the city's foggy nebulous violet, while two cords of neon orange, meanwhile, railroading each side of the road, guiding both Onyx and Bruce as they continued speeding up it. Onyx glanced out the window, spotting the wiggling reflection of his eyes in the buildings, though nothing else besides the stars. He bounced his chin up at one of the skyscrapers they were passing, and at once the perpetual snarling frown to his face snarled and frowned harsher as he saw this. High up on the skyscraper, and looming in the shadows, a devilish fat purple sphere protruding out the building like a bubble. Roughly the size of a beach ball, the sphere's very presence caused him to shiver and snare, tugging at his collar nervously. There were sirens, he suddenly noticed, wailing in chorus in their eerie and ominous moans from far, far up the street, wailing louder by the second. Onyx kept peering out the window, watching all the people cleaving up and down sidewalks, all of them done up nice and spritzy in their plush suits and ties and dresses, tugging at their collars periodically, as Onyx did. He looked up. Halfway up one of the skyscrapers, he squinted, blinking at the giant white screen flashing, just like the screen he had seen earlier, except this one joined by dozens of other flashing white screens all up and down the road. These screens were called sky signs, you see, and they were scattered all throughout the city. He read the first sign he could clearly see, and in bold black letters, this is what it said. The heart is strong, but the mind is weak. Work on it. He nodded, turning to the next sign, and he saw the city's axiom. Only success shall free you. He dipped his chin, frowning and turning forward. A big black building dead up ahead in the center of the street. It was a divider building, he realized, a monolithic structure shaped like an arrowhead, and dividing Metro Main first left and then right. They veered right. Though meanwhile, a bit further up the road and closer to the sirens, an older man, a black man wearing a black fedora hat and silver trench coat, stepping onto the roadway and crossing it, thinking to himself all the while about the black ink cloud he had seen sailing over the forest earlier that morning, and certainly paying no attention to Bruce Bonesteel's truck barreling up the street. Now then, by that point, Bruce hadn't noticed the black fedora man either. This is because Bruce had become far too distracted glancing over at Onyx. You excited? Said Bruce. Onyx shrugged. In a nervous way, I suppose. Gotta be honest with you, Pard, continued Bruce, smirking at him. I reckon I'd be pretty dadgum nervous too if I was you. Onyx arched an eyebrow. You, really? You would? He said. Oh, sure, Brooksy. I reckon with all that pressure you've been dealing with, all them people counting on you to win them their major, all that hard and grueling work you've been putting in. Yes, Bruce, I get the point, thank you. And shoot, Bruce continued. I reckon that today might be the big day, Brooksy. You winning all the generals and stuff. Can't see no reason that them there keepers won't be giving you the major. Onyx took a breath, nodding. Yes, that's my supposition, he said, breathy. He turned back to the road and threw himself back in the seat, clenching his teeth, spearing his arm out, screaming, Keepers Christ, Bruce, watch out. Huh? Replied Bruce, drifting back to the street, just in time to see the black fedora man standing in the center of it, crouching, dropping something to the road. Bruce jerked the wheel. Sheet! Cried Bruce, screeching both tires up. The truck rolled to its side, skimming past the black fedora man and actually grazing the man's fedora before clunk, violently jerked both Onyx and Bruce in their seats as all four tires dropped back to the road. Both Onyx and Bruce sat stiff, silent, and shocked as Bruce sped onward. They arrived at their destination, City Hall, shortly thereafter. Now then, City Hall was a tall, another girthy building. Seemingly three buildings formed into one, with a center building, a left wing, and a right. City Hall was composed entirely out of black glass mirror, as most everything in the city was. Bruce parked the truck on the curb in front of City Hall, while Onyx left out the truck, dashing inside. Striding down a yawning, gloomy Black Mirror corridor, his shoes quacking with each wet, soggy step, he arrived at two black glass double doors at the end of the corridor, doors rising at least 4 stories high. He opened one of the doors and slipped through. Moments later, he found himself seated at a small and rather pathetic wooden desk, smack in the center of an otherwise black and gaping room. A speck of light beaming down on him from above, gleaning his black and slick back hair. He perked up, listening. High heels clicking somewhere off in the dark and getting louder. Suddenly, he jumped back, and Lindy Lynn, the city's head key, whooshed out the darkness wearing a checkered black and white dress, her dark brown eyes like daggers staring down at him. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. Did I scare you?" she said, sweet but sassy. He smirked. "Not at all, Miss Lynn," he said in a calm and cool, well-mannered voice. "Quite the opposite, actually. I was simply remit by your radiant looks today." She snarled. "Stop being such a kiss-ass," she said scathingly. His face flopped. "You were almost late today, you know," she continued. "Yes, well, you blithering on about it doesn't exactly hurry things up now, does it?" Her pale and thin cheeks blossomed. "I say, don't you have something for me today?" he said. "My understanding was that I'd be receiving something from you, as a result of winning all the generals." She scoffed, smirking at him, stuffing a hand to her pocket, fishing something out. He, however, hadn't seen hide nor hair of the city's sole major, the award he anticipated winning that day. He wondered where Lindy must have hidden it, stroking his chin, drawing his attention back to her. She flicked something at him with her thumb. "Here," she said. A flash of gold spindling through the air, colliding with his chest. He cupped the object, dropping his gaze and his heart along with it. "Drats," he whispered. A thick golden coin that had the words "Coin of Accomplishment" engraved around its edges. He smacked his lips, when suddenly, ferdump, as she dropped a tree's worth of paper in front of him. My, that's a lot of paper, is what he thought to himself. He also wondered where she hid such a stack. "Keeper's papers," she spouted sternly. "You fill them out, answer all the questions, and you have them done for tonight. You hear me?" He bent back, putting distance between himself and her stabbing finger as he gulped, tugging his collar, nodding silently at her. She snooted. "I will fetch you when you are finished. Understood?" she said. He nodded, cursing under his breath as she spun back around and went striding off into the dark. He closed his eyes, biting his bottom lip, clutching his hands into juddering fists. He sighed and finally relaxed some, snatching a pencil up from atop the desk, opening the packet of papers and reading the paper's very first question, which asked, "How many MTL awards have you won?" He scoffed and in numerals wrote 199. Turning to the next question, and that one asked him, "Employment?" He wrote, "Attorney," a profession he'd only recently joined a few days ago, upon seeing a certain sky sign. The next question inquired, "Annual income?" He responded, 100,000 prish. The question after that asked, "What are your opinions regarding Montuga Forest?" He snarled, leaning back, as if the paper itself were a threat to jump out and bite him, as he wrote, "It is a foul, dirty, and deathly place that no one should ever dare visit," and by Joe, he meant it. He turned to the next question, "Have you ever once had a negative thought about our keepers?" He cringed and swiftly wrote, "No, never." Flipping to the next question, "Have you ever spoke ill of our keepers?" Equally as fast, he wrote, "No, never, not once." Finally, flipping to the last question, which asked, "What is your opinion of our keepers?" His hand trembling, he took a breath, steadying himself, lowering the pencil to the paper, he wrote, "They are the greatest, most successful, merciful, righteous gods to have ever been." He dropped the pencil, sighed, and leaned back. "Done," he whispered. Indeed, he was happy to have won something that day, even if it was just a coin of accomplishment, though he was sorely disappointed that his wait for freedom would apparently be extended, and therefore so would his work. He was even more disappointed, mind you, that given his rank of awards in the city, the worst part of his day was still yet to come. I tell you, it wasn't an hour later when he found himself seated back outside in the dark and cold. Although at least it stopped raining, he told himself. He was seated on a black glass throne, you see, a black glass throne positioned on what would be considered the second place spot, on a first, second place podium, hoisted on a stage and overlooking the crowd at Metro Square. Metro Square, located on the city's east central perimeter, and the square was roughly the size of a soccer field, nothing but a flat black mirror sheet, though one surrounded on all 4 sides by hundreds of pillars, hundreds of floodlights. Floodlights tilted back and pillaring up bright white beaming lights into the sky like prism bars. Now then, to his left, sitting on the highest throne, was the city's Met box, Lord Charlie Orne, a gruffy old man, rather full of himself, and Lord Orne had mangly, messy gray hair and wore a shimmering black robe. On the far side of Orne sat Captain Kevin Ace, a stout young man who had swoopy jet black hair, glowing icy blue eyes, and who wore a tight powder blue uniform, glancing at Onyx and winking at him. All 3 men facing forward, that is until Onyx twisted back, peeking over his shoulder, gawking up, a tall and slender black glass pole darting high up into the sky just behind the stage. He followed the pole all the way up, and there it is, he thought to himself. Slack-jawed, drool began puddling atop his bottom lip, while his staring eyes filled with the glowing purple reflection. For high atop the pole, cut between 2 black glass talons, sat the city's most elusive and sought-after award. A dazzling spectacle of symmetrical perfection, radiant, vibrant, and fluid, all alluring and seemingly sucking his eyes right out their sockets. Behold, the city's sole major, the shimmering, sparkling, purple orb. If only I could touch it, if even it's just for a moment, then I'd finally be successful, and we'd all be set. Suddenly, right at that moment, Lord Orin stood to the microphone and in an angry, raspy voice spoke. Bring out the traitor, or, echoed throughout Metro Square. A sharp metal clank and a floodlight appeared, beaming across Metro Square, spotlighting the center of a ground-level stage at the base of the wall far across the Black Mirror sheet. A loud groan let out as all the crowd turned to the ground-level stage, watching wide-eyed as two burly miners wearing powder blue uniforms came lumbering onto the stage, lugging along with them another man, an older man, a man wearing a white T-shirt and blue jeans and whose keep collar glowed a blistering bright red. The miners dropped the man to the center of the stage, limp. Onyx recognized the man from the news. It was Kip Blood, a scoundrel, coward, and a cheat, and a former client of none other than Bruce Bonesteels. Kip curled in the ball, laying lifeless on the stage, though appearing to be mumbling. All of Kip's joints had been broken, Onyx realized, and soon Kip's mouth would be silenced, as a burly miner wearing a powder blue uniform went lumbering over to Kip and... smash! Kip's teeth shattered like glass to the ground as the miners slammed the jagged tennis ball-sized stone to Kip's mouth, preventing Kip from screaming words of revolt or freedom, bloody in Kip's face. The crowd screamed and jerked away. Face him, cried Orin. Face the traitor who tried to escape, for he had not been deemed worthy enough, successful enough by our keepers. He could have ended us all. Now, face him and see his fate, 8-8. Groaning, crowd members turned back to the stage, waiting and watching, because they didn't want it to happen to them. Firing squad, ready, EE, cried Orin, levering up an arm. Clicks and clanks from the 10-man firing squad, readying their weapons, pointing their muzzles at Kip. Onyx closed his eyes, turning his cheek. Fire! Boom! And the sky lit red. Booms and bangs popping eardrums. Cherry red blood oozing on the stage. Kip flopping like a fish, bullets puncturing like proofs punching pillows. Bullet after bullet, bang after boom. Children screamed, mothers cried, fathers yelled into the night. Onyx cringed. Bang! Until finally, it stopped. He fluttered his eyes open, frowned and sat mute, gazing somberly at the lifeless body across from him. Below him, thousands of men, women, and children, groaning, moaning, begging not to look, yet being forced to do so. One by one, like a tour group led by police, crowd members passing the mutilated body, looking at it, studying it, inspecting it, constantly being reminded of what shall happen to them if they break the rules and disobey. The keepers, merciless gods, thought Onyx, and Orin, their ruthless voice, he continued, ruling the city with an iron fist, ruling without mercy, ruling and killing all who questioned or stood in their way. It was a city of glory, a city of success, a city of violence. Welcome to Metroland.